anyone who's staff, must have million experiences of the everyday competition. The Research Excellence Framework, that's the system the government has set up well, I don't know how to describe it, but to police our research is nothing more than making sure that we publish, even if we have nothing to say, that we still publish, that we are competitive with our peers, who are no longer peers, but rivals. There are all sorts of mechanisms now for building in competition, managerialism in the institutions now, kind of cost centres in institutions. All of that, I think, is bringing the marketisation of education right into the fabric of everyday life in the institution and utterly changing it. So privatisation may not just be that UE is bought up by Barclays. You'd have quite a good campaign, I suspect, if that was mooted. It may not be that, but it'll happen in lots and lots of different ways, which I think all of them we need to guard against. Now, let me move on to polarisation. But one of the things the government says is there is a problem with higher education. There's a problem with universities. There are lots of different problems. One of them is that we need to improve social mobility. Now, actually, if you just, as an argument, that's a fair argument. Higher education at the moment does not deliver the access it should. It is completely stratified. There are major problems with it which should be addressed. The sad fact is that these reforms will do exactly the opposite. They will do nothing to address the fact that, for example, there are more black and ethnic minority students at London Metropolitan University than across the Russell Group. It will do nothing to address the fact that something like 10 to 12% of students at Oxbridge, UCL, Imperial are from working class backgrounds. Those are the real questions. These will do exactly the opposite. The two most famous example, I guess, is in the white paper, where they're going to have a two-tier system. So you are going to remove the caps for universities to recruit for what they call the top students. The language is all very important. We recognise their language. And at the bottom of the system, at the other end, again, this is their language, we're going to offer up 20,000 places for universities who lower their prices. Because you know that universities, when they're allowed to ask £9,000, immediately did ask £9,000. And that completely messed up the government's budget because they thought it would only be £7,500. So now you have this system, removing the caps for the top students, people chasing bargain basement providers, lowering their costs in the hope that they will get access to extra students. And this is a way of cementing existing inequalities. As one campaigner put it, who runs the campaign for the public university, he sort of shrugs his shoulders and goes, what do you expect at the moment? This is a stratified system for a stratified society. It reflects the way, class interest, and reflects the class basis of the way universities are currently organised. It's just going to exacerbate that. So you look already at what the impact of the raising of the tripling of fees is going to be, and one of the most stark expressions of this is that London and the South East, the drop-off has been minimal in applications so far. Yorkshire and the North East, some of the poorest areas in the country, have seen already the biggest drop-off in applications. So again, another way of seeing polarisation taking place. It's clear their arguments don't stack up. I mean, one of the things that we should be asking, apart from what is a university for, which they don't really ask that much, but why are they doing this? I mean, are they doing it because they skip? Well, it's certainly not that. If they just had last week's quantitative easing was 75 billion, we could, maybe we, collectively speaking, are an investment they should be taken seriously, but clearly not. Is it because British universities are failing? Well, actually, they're horrible stuff. But this is the stuff that they listen to. The best of all is the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. It's a very glossy book. It's powered by Thomson Reuters. You don't sponsor anything anymore. It's powered by Thomson Reuters, and it's full of quite horrible stuff. It's just a league table based on very false accounting again. And actually, the UK does very well by their own terms. The UK does well. Lots of top universities. Very efficient for money. So it's not that. It's not because they can't afford it. It is an ideological assault on what they think is a public system that is no longer fit for purpose. Because why should we pay for working class students to study English? This should be taught in proper universities with students who are able to, enjoy it. Philosophy. What right do ordinary people have to study philosophy? They should be, if they're going to study, they should be doing something useful. That's if. And obviously, what they really should be doing is just getting the jobs, the few jobs that are there. Remember, 1 million youth unemployment has just been announced. their apprenticeship scheme is a joke. They've taken away EMA, which needs to be part of our campaigns. So the whole thing is utterly a mess from their point of view, but it's an ideological assault.
So where can this notion of what's good about education come from? Now, there's some interesting precursors to this sort of debate. In the 1950s, there was the Universities of the World International Conference in UNESCO, and they said whatever university it is, it should stand for these principles: the right to pursue knowledge for its own sake, wherever the search for truth may lead, i.e., even if it's unpopular, unpalatable, or unprofitable. I think more to the point. That there should be the tolerance of divergent opinion and freedom from political influence, and there should be an obligation of social institutions to promote, through teaching and research, the principles of freedom and justice, of human dignity and solidarity, and to develop mutually beneficial material and moral aid on an international level. That's wonderful. That's kind of like knowledge transfer without the money being involved. The idea of a university being to promote human good, okay, on a cooperative level internationally without competing with each other for scant resources and so on and so forth. I think it's quite good. And that comes from this International Conference of Universities. The more recent Global Colloquium of University Presidents said, academic institutions bear a heavy responsibility to protect scholars and students who work within them from improper pressures, whether political, cultural, economic, or ideological. Okay? So economic and ideological pressures on academics now to teach in certain areas, to research certain areas, because that's what the government's decided to fund, are illegitimate. This is from 2005. Okay? This isn't an ancient document. This is, university presidents gathering to decide what the good of a university is, and coming up with something that doesn't say drawing in money from the private sector and doing research that's utilisable to, British aerospace or some, defence industries and so on.
But one of the problems with all of that is that actually the pressure, the external pressures around the market and the introduction of a market into higher education mean that we start to behave in ways which we don't really want to behave in which we don't even subscribe to, or don't believe in, but we start to do them. Well, that creates considerable tensions amongst us. What this also does, it attacks the core of learning, the core activity that we're involved in a university, which is around learning and teaching. Because we shift the ground from a learning engagement, that we're all learners, we're all involved in that, to a ground where students arrive are encouraged to think of themselves as consumers. And that is inappropriate. It is not an appropriate way to conduct learning and to conduct education. So this isn't simply about the profitability or whatever, or the finances of it. This is also, for universities, an issue about what occurs in the classroom, literally in the classroom, between teachers and students, and between students. And I think one of the things that we do at our peril is to concentrate only on the quality of our employment. We do need to do that because it's important that people are properly remunerated for the work that they do, but also about the quality of the education that we deliver. And to my mind, we don't do enough. We don't concentrate on enough. We don't spend enough time on that, because that is our core purpose. If we do that, I think then we can have a much better argument with our colleagues and with our students about what it is we are engaged with and what it is what we are resistant to.
Now, just to give you a couple of statements to show how this unfolds in the 2000s up to the introduction of fees, and if this isn't deeply disturbing, then you have problems. It was once the role of government to provide for the purposes of university. It is now the role of universities to provide for the purposes of government. If I told you Mussolini said that, I'm sure you wouldn't bat an eyelid. You'd say, well, he would, wouldn't he? This is the head of the Higher Education Funding Council saying universities need to serve government. Okay? Tony Blair himself, in a quite sickening speech, I think Brunel University on university funding, said, "We have not thereby abandoned the classic Cardinal Newman account of the university. This is a rhetorical trick where they say, by the way, we still like Oxford and Cambridge and proper places, and we haven't abandoned this idea of, people sort of walking around university grounds sipping wine and pontificating, because we're not Philistines, I live in Islington, for God's sake, So we've not abandoned this concept of the university. Colleges as sites of disinterested learning are one of the great parts of our civilization. But we have grafted onto them a very modern phenomenon, that that knowledge was, and this is another rhetorical trick, knowledge that was once the preserve an elite is now the indispensable requirement for economic advance. So it's to say, look, it's either that you've got a small section of society who kind of, ponce around Oxford and Cambridge and get educated, or we serve the economy. There's nothing in between. There's nothing on the radar that could perhaps, indicate some kind of movement towards the global colloquium of university presidents' ideas. Now, I could go on with quote after quote after quote of what these people say, and none of them say education is something that really enhances the lives of the individuals within it, or it's a social practice as a good for the community in which it's situated. This doesn't happen. This is not on the radar for these people. Okay, I think there needs to be an understanding that academic freedom itself, and this is crucial, is the main thing that's being challenged by these reforms. Not just our academic freedom, the academic freedom of students as well as lecturers. The very concept of being able to inquire in something because it's socially important, culturally important, historically important, or important for its own self, is being withering away day to day. Why? In large part because of the introduction of market mechanisms. The last point is the market mechanisms themselves are attached to a form of very much manipulated so-called student demand. That's what we do. That's all we do nowadays. We say, where are the students applying? Let's do those courses. Are those courses a social good? Doesn't matter. If you don't do that, you'll lose your job because there's going to be no funding for your department anymore. This starts at school. Yeah, I mean, there's a wonderful thing. I teach journalism. I go into the first class and I go, hands up, who wants to be a journalist? And they kind of go, And I said, that's wonderful. I love the idea of students in a university not knowing what they want to do when they finish. It's great. Just kind of experiment, investigate, enjoy yourselves, learn things. It's wonderful, yeah? But there's this really horrible, like tear-jerking contradiction there. Because they know at the back of their minds, they've been through schools where they've met with the career officers. I don't know if it happened when you guys were at school. When I was at school, every single person in the university on their career guidance thing had wig maker for some strange reason, regardless of what you wanted to do. So there's this anxiety set up right at the beginning, okay? You're going through school, you choose your options, where are you going to go, what are you going to be, who are you going to be, and that carries on up to the A-levels. You choose your A-levels as if at the age of 14 you've got some idea of what you want to be, or you should have some idea of what you want to be. But you're funneled, you're channeled, you get to university with all of this pressure you've had through your A-levels, about succeeding in the A-levels, about keeping your eyes on your career, and then you're hit with the career service. You choose your modules, very often in terms of where you think that's going to end you up, at the end of your degree and in terms of employability. And these things are all great. No one wants a load of unemployed graduates. I mean, that's again a false dichotomy. It's not either, you have an educational system that has value socially and culturally for communities, or you have a bunch of really anxious 18 to 22-year-olds who are desperately struggling to try and get a job. The universities being used by employers to train people, right? And the reason I think that's the biggest problem with the fees at the moment. Now, I'm not going to give you kind of some romantic idea of the past, but in the past, employers used to train employees. Yeah? If you wanted to be a journalist, you go and work at a local newspaper, and they'd pay for you to go and do an NCTJ course. They used to be apprenticeships. The genius, the evil genius of what's happened to universities is that employers don't want to do that anymore. They've turned around and said, it's too much of a cost for us to train up people to come and work for us. So what we'll do is we'll get the state to do that for us, but then the state says, well, that's too much for us because we need to cut taxes for the rich and what have you. Why don't we get the students to pay for their own training, to create their own value for the enterprises they go off and work in, and lumber with them with the debt for the rest of their lives, so they have to keep working?